You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button.
LSU spring football, they're in the news, and really not for what's happening on the field. Jamar Cain up and left for Denver this weekend to go join Sean Payton's staff. Brody Miller of The Athletic on Twitter at Brody A. Miller joins us to break it all down. Brody, we appreciate the time. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for coming on. Look, Brody, I hear you're actually kind of the expert on matters like this. So why does Sean Payton hate the LSU Tigers?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Sean Payton is on a lifelong mission because somebody cut him off on the New Orleans highway, split exit, and, it was an LSU sticker on the back of it. He's just been on a vendetta ever since. Yeah, it's my favorite thing. And by the way, I don't even know if there's any, some of this stuff with, Sean Payton and LSU with, not drafted players and, the tension over Joe Brady and Ryan Nielsen. Some of it is kind of okay, there's something there. But most of it, I have a fun time mocking.
It's just, it had to be. It could have been any other team in the NFL, but it was Denver, and it's that dastardly Sean Payton. He's at it again, sabotaging LSU now from the Mile High City. All in jest, obviously. Brody, in seriousness with it, that is not something you see often where a position coach leaves in the middle of spring practice for another job. Now, look, it's an NFL job. It's his first NFL opportunity. All that makes a lot of sense. Just kind of your reaction when that news did break on Friday. Or on Saturday.
Yeah, definite surprise. I mean, we were literally walking over to interview Jacoby and Guillory as that happened. So good timing, I guess. But, a definite surprise for the reasons you said. You don't see, a coach leaving isn't that crazy, but a coach leaving at that time of year for an NFL team, you don't see that too often. And it stings. That's a tough loss because he is one of LSU's best recruiters, period. And you can't stress that enough. The recruiting is where you have to start with that. Your Jackson Howards and Deshaun Lomax and Jaden Daniels. Those don't happen without Jamar Cain. On the other hand, and he's also a really good D-line coach. I think that gets kind of glossed over sometimes. But at the same time, LSU was able to get Jamar Cain because it would pay him obscene money for a defensive line coach and get him from Lincoln Riley's USC. So I do think that, they will be able to replace this with a big name hire. It's kind of early to get a great sense of who that could be. Your Bo Davis has always come up at times like this over at Texas, and certainly that'll be somebody on the list. Your Todd Bateses at Oklahoma. And also I wouldn't rule out Gerald Chapman, who was a big get for them to bring back as an analyst. But, it's going to be a really interesting few weeks.
So where do they go from here? How do they handle it? I mean, spring practice doesn't stop, right? They have to roll on. Who do they really look to handle those defensive line coaching duties?
Yeah, so I think Gerald Chapman clearly takes over there, which is kind of a luxury that they're able to do that they are able to kind of, turn to a guy who knows the program, but is also kind of overqualified for that role, somebody they think really highly of. So I think that's kind of a win-win in some ways. At the same time, I think it also helps having John Jancic just recently voted. That also helps a lot to kind of have another guy who, is coaching that D-line adjacent area. But then also, it helps that it's spring ball. It's not the end of the world. They have a lot of their top D linemen are out with injuries right now anyway. You don't have to necessarily stress too much about it, if that makes sense. But yeah, Gerald Chapman will run that room for now.
And then you mentioned some names there, and it's a little too early, right, to kind of zero in. Obviously, you mentioned Bo Davis, and yes, anytime the defensive line position comes open at LSU, it feels like Bo Davis is the first name out of everybody's mouth every time, and this will probably be no different. My question is more on timeline. Do you get the sense that this is something they'd like to have done before the end of spring practice, just to get somebody in there to kind of acclimate themselves with the team? They obviously brought in a lot of transfers. There is some turnover on there, but you mentioned injuries. Or is it something that LSU is fine having drag out to summer?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My read would be, I don't think spring ball itself would be a priority really at all, just because it's an experienced team. They have people in place who know what they're doing. There's a lot of continuity on the staff, top to bottom. Like I think they're not going to make a rash decision or rush anything because of spring ball. I think the more timelines you're thinking of really is recruiting. Like you got junior days coming up and things like that. And I don't think it's even possible to really get someone in there by then. But that's probably the other thing you're thinking of. And even that, you're probably not stressing because the way LSU does its recruiting, it's such a team format of like multiple guys on each guy. And so I don't think and also just knowing Brian Kelly, I don't think it will be something where he has to get this done in a week. I think the way he thinks of things is because it's this time of year, that gives you less reason to rush because there's not a competition for guys right now, and there's not everybody going through the carousel. Things are kind of settled, so you can just do your due diligence and find out who the best guy is.
Brody Miller is our guest of The Athletic on Twitter at Brody A. Miller. Brody, let's talk a little bit about what you've seen on the field so far and some media availability in spring practice. Why don't we just start with the defensive line? That's a group that is kind of under the spotlight a little bit when you bring in transfers. You have some injuries, obviously, with Wingo and Smith, but they'll be coming back. It's a group that there's pretty high expectations for. How have they looked early on in spring?
Yeah, I think the main thing you can really, because you're right, the two best defensive linemen, and the most important are obviously not there, and Wingo and Smith, and I mean, even an edge rusher, Sean Womack might be in the mix. He's not available yet. But I think what I will say is you see Savion Jones clearly looking like a guy who operates like a starter, in terms of first unit every day. But he's also just, I think Guillory's the main established guy. But other than that, like Savion Jones is clearly the next guy in that spring group who's just clearly one of the leaders, one of the main talents and things like that. I think Paris Shand also just stands out because he is just massive, and I know that's part of why, just not like in a size way, but in a frame, length, height, all that. Like he just looks like a massive body, and I know a big part of their intrigue in him was that he's kind of this unproduced piece of clay where he didn't even learn football till late in high school, didn't start playing, and they think they can really develop him in the weight room way more here than at Arizona. So I don't think I've seen anything football-wise to be like, that guy, I know he got it, but just size and all that, I'm really impressed. But so it's hard to make too much. I think the other thing, though, is those edge rushers, which I personally still count as defensive line. Yeah, I think it's interesting. None of them are huge dudes. They're definitely more in that they are a little thinner, a little more wiry, obviously big, strong guys, but not like bulky or anything like that. Villagofa is clearly going to be the main front runner there. Talk to some people on the strength staff who think that guy's going to be a stud this year, but even then, they don't feel as big as BJ Ojolari. So I do think you're going to see a little more, and part of why they wanted Jantic in that role is to get a little more coverage teaching, things like that. So I wonder how much more versatile those guys are this year.
What about cornerback? That's a position that everybody wanted to see, obviously. And look, y'all are only in there for 20 minutes normally at a time in the early morning. But anybody standing out specifically just in drills you've been able to observe in the cornerback room?
Yeah, I think that's actually, that's some of the rooms that I'm like watching every day the closest because it is so interesting because it's so talented in a way and so unproven in other ways. And there's like 5 different guys you could convince me are those 2 starting boundary corners of start the year. So I think it's interesting to see that as Dai Alexander is quickly jumping out and clearly kind of putting himself in the mix. He's a guy who like I'll never in a million years pretend I'm like an X's and O's football guy. I can watch film and be like that guy, but at the same time, like I watch the Southeastern stuff and it's like he's big, kind of got that like Kai Garner kind of frame film where he's very big and long, bigger than your normal corner. And he just made plays. He had like 7 picks at Southeastern, and I wonder how good he could be in the SEC. And Taviano, I mean, he looks like a grown college player. I think he's around 200 pounds, right? And he's also getting time at safety, which is going to be really interesting because I think he's mainly nickel, but he's getting time in those spots because he is bigger and they don't have much depth there. I wonder if he could push a stage right for a starting nickel spot. So I think Taviano really stands out. Also, what's going to happen with Dai Alexander? We haven't really chanced, like Denver Harris hasn't really gone first in anything, which doesn't mean anything, but it's just noteworthy. And we haven't really got to see them go up against anybody. But yeah, that room is so interesting where I'm very confident the talent will be good. My feeling is though there will just be more growing pains than last year because
maybe more talented, but less veteran.
That's a really good point. I mean, the guys you brought in, Bernard-Converse was a 4-year starter in the Big 12. So
all of them, right?
Yeah.
Every one of them, even if they weren't that impressive, they were just guys who knew what they were doing.
They played a lot of football. For sure. Brody, before I let you go, I have to ask you about quarterback because it's so interesting, surrounding that position in spring because it's Jaden's the starter, and every time that's mentioned, there's always the caveat but Garrett Nussmeier, and you got to watch out for Garrett and whatnot. Have they done anything that y'all have seen with the quarterback reps that is noteworthy in spring?
The answer is no. I mean, it has been pretty business as usual in the sense that, Jaden Daniels is QB1. And I am saying that as somebody who is in the Garrett Nussmeier camp, of hey, guys, I wonder if he's going to get a little more time than we realize. But it is Jaden Daniels. He is the starter, and that's not really up for grabs. But at the same time, I do wonder if we do see Nussmeier rotate in a little bit like we saw in the bowl game. Or, is it a tighter leash? I don't know, because they do have more expectations. Last year, it could be, hey, we're just trying to get the foundation. This year it's a little more, hey, man, you're trying to win a national title. So it's Jaden Daniels. There's no indication in any world that it's not. But, Garrett Nussmeier looks just really good.
He's Brody Miller on Twitter at Brody A. Miller, covering LSU for The Athletic. Y'all go read his stuff at The Athletic. Does great work. Brody, appreciate the time as always, sir. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.